somewhere in Africa, there is a place that most people have never heard of. A place that doesn't look dangerous from the outside. No giant walls covered in spikes. No dramatic towers with searchlights scanning the night sky. Just a gate. A simple, ordinary gate. But the people who have walked through that gate, they say something changes the moment it closes behind you. The air feels different. The sounds feel different. And the world you knew, your family, your home, your freedom suddenly feels very, very far away. This place has a name, Kaliti, and today, we are going inside. Before we go any further, if you've never heard of Kaliti Prison, you are not alone. Most people outside of Ethiopia have no idea it exists. And that is exactly the point. What happens behind those walls has stayed hidden for decades, whispered about in living rooms, denied by governments, documented quietly by human rights organizations that most people never read. But the stories always found a way out. Through former prisoners who couldn't sleep at night. Through journalists who risked everything to tell the truth. This is not a movie. Every single thing you are about to hear is real. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button right now. Because this is the kind of story they don't want you to know about. And we are just getting started. To understand Kaliti, you first have to understand where it sits. Addis Ababa, the capital city of Ethiopia, a busy, loud, colorful city of over 5 million people. Markets filled with spices, streets filled with the sound of music, motorcycles, and laughter. Now drive south, about 11 kilometers from the center of the city, past the traffic, past the noise, past the parts of the city most tourists ever see. You reach a place called Kaliti, a quiet area, ordinary looking, nothing that would make you slow down if you were just passing through. And there, sitting quietly like it has nothing to hide, is the prison, Kaliti Federal Prison, also known locally as Marimia, which, in Amharic, simply means correction center, correction center. That word correction sounds gentle, doesn't it? Like somewhere you go to be helped, to be fixed, to be made better. Because Kaliti was never actually built to be a prison. The year is 1991. Ethiopia has just gone through one of the most violent chapters in its history. A brutal military government called the Derg, which had ruled the country with an iron fist for 17 years, has finally collapsed. The country is exhaling. People are cautiously hopeful. But in the middle of all that change, there is a problem. The new government needs somewhere to put people, political opponents, prisoners of the old regime, suspects, people they weren't sure what to do with yet. Not built for this purpose. Not designed with any thought given to the people who would live inside it. Just available. And so, almost by accident, Kaliti Prison is born. No master plan. No architect's blueprint for a humane facility. Just a collection of existing structures, thrown together, that would eventually become the most important federal prison in the entire country. And here is the detail that will stay with you. Most of the structures that prisoners would live in for years, the walls, the rooms, the basic structures of the compound were built by the prisoners themselves. With their own hands, they built their own cage. By the early 2000s, Kaliti had grown. It now had 8 zones. Zone 1, Zone 2, all the way to Zone 8. But it is Zone 9 that people talk about most. A group of young Ethiopian writers and bloggers named themselves after it. They called themselves the Zone 9 bloggers. And when you understand why, when you understand what that name meant to them, it will tell you everything about what kind of place Kaliti really is. We will come back to them, because their story is one you need to hear. But first let's talk about what life inside Kaliti actually looked like. Imagine a room, not a large room, a small one, poorly lit. The kind of room where the walls feel like they're slowly moving closer to you every day. Now imagine sharing that room not with one other person, with 5, but with dozens. A 2009 report from the Human Rights League of the Horn of Africa described what investigators found inside Kaliti. Hundreds of inmates crammed into single cells. Cells with almost no ventilation, meaning the air inside was thick, stale, and heavy, especially during Ethiopia's hot seasons. On the floor, concrete, cold, hard concrete. That was where many prisoners slept. Not on beds, not on mats, on the bare ground. Diseases spread easily in those conditions. Tuberculosis, a serious lung infection, was a real and constant threat. Fleas and lice, tiny insects that feed on human skin, were reported throughout the prison. Thank you for watching, and be sure to subscribe for the full story. One of the most basic things a human being needs was not always available in enough quantities for drinking, let alone washing. And if a prisoner got sick, access to medical care was described as nearly absent. Nearly absent. Think about that for a moment. You are sick, you are locked in a room, and there is almost no one coming to help you. But overcrowding and disease were not the only dangers inside Kaliti. The reports also described something else. Something darker. Torture. Personnel at the prison, the people responsible for keeping order, were documented to have used torture against inmates. This wasn't a rumor passed from one person to another. It was recorded, written down, reported by multiple human rights organizations over multiple years. And perhaps the cruelest detail of all, if a prisoner tried to speak up about what was happening to them, if they filed a complaint about their conditions, that complaint itself was punishable. In other words, suffer in silence, or suffer more. This was the world inside Kaliti. Comment below, had you ever heard of Kaliti Prison before today? Let us know. And if this story is opening your eyes, share it with someone who needs to see it. Because this is where the story takes a turn that many people don't expect. When most people think of a prison, they think of criminals. People who robbed someone, people who hurt someone, people who broke laws that most of us agree should exist. Kaliti held those people too. But it also held another category of person entirely. Journalists, bloggers, opposition politicians, human rights activists, ordinary people whose only crime was speaking, writing an article the government didn't like, posting something online that challenged powerful people, standing up in a public place and saying, "I disagree." In Ethiopia, for many years, that was enough to land you in Kaliti. Among those who passed through Kaliti's gates, there is a name that stands out. Not because his story is the most extreme, but because he was able to come back and tell the world exactly what he saw. His name is Martin Schibbye. Martin was a journalist from Sweden, a country thousands of miles from Ethiopia, a country where journalists are generally free to report without fear of being locked up. In 2011, Martin and his photographer colleague, Johan Persson, traveled to Ethiopia to cover a story. They were reporting on a conflict in a remote region of the country, a story they believed the world needed to hear. They were captured, charged with terrorism, and sent to Kaliti. Martin Schibbye spent 438 days inside that prison. Over a year of his life taken. When he came out, he did something important. He drew a map, a detailed, careful map of the prison layout, the zones, the buildings, the spaces in between. He described the daily rhythms of life inside, the sounds, the routines, the way time moves differently when you have no freedom. His account gave the outside world one of its clearest pictures of what Kaliti actually looked like on the inside. And what he described matched, almost exactly, what human rights organizations had been saying for years. The overcrowding was real. The conditions were real. The fear was real. By around 2012, Kaliti held approximately 8,000 inmates, 8,000 people, in a facility that was never designed to be a prison in the first place. Built from makeshift structures by the prisoners themselves, patched together over 20 years into something that functioned but barely. To give you a sense of what 8,000 people in one compound feels like, imagine taking every single person in a busy shopping mall on a Saturday afternoon, locking them inside, removing most of the bathrooms, cutting the water supply, reducing the food, and turning off most of the lights. Now imagine living like that, not for an afternoon, for years. And then, one night in September 2016, something happened inside Kaliti that would finally force the outside world to pay attention. Not a report, not a human rights document, something that couldn't be ignored, something that could be seen from outside the walls. Smoke rising into the Addis Ababa sky on the night of September 3rd, 2016. The prison was on fire. What happened that night, and what it revealed about the true conditions inside Kaliti, that is a story for what comes next. Because the fire was not just a fire, and the deaths that followed were not just an accident. There was a bigger picture, a wider story, something building for months, not just inside those walls, but across the entire country. And once you see that picture, everything changes. September 3rd, 2016. Nighttime in Addis Ababa. The city is mostly asleep, but inside Kaliti Prison, something has gone terribly wrong. Flames are tearing through the compound, fast, hungry, the kind of fire that doesn't wait for you to get out of the way. And remember, inside those walls are 8,000 people, 8,000 souls, locked in, crammed into zones and cells and sheet metal shacks arranged like a maze. A maze that, in the dark, with smoke filling the air, becomes something far more dangerous. It becomes a trap. Prisoners began to panic. Some ran for exits, some tried to climb, some just ran anywhere to get away from the smoke and the heat. And then the guards opened fire. 2 prisoners were shot and killed trying to escape the chaos. But that wasn't the end. 21 more inmates died that night. Not from bullets, from the stampede, from the smoke, from the suffocation that comes when thousands of people rush through narrow spaces with no air left to breathe. 23 people dead in a single night. Inside a prison that was never supposed to exist in the first place. The fire at Kaliti didn't happen on a quiet, ordinary night. It happened in the middle of something much bigger. In 2016, Ethiopia was shaking. Across the country, hundreds of thousands of people were protesting against the government. It was one of the largest waves of protest the country had seen in years. People were angry, demanding change, demanding to be heard. The government responded with force, arrests, crackdowns, reports of live ammunition used against protesters. And inside Kaliti on that same night, fire. Was it a coincidence? Investigators and journalists noted the timing. Some reports suggested the fire might have been connected to the unrest spreading across the country. The full truth of how and why that fire started has never been officially confirmed. And that silence, that absence of a clear answer, itself a part of this story. Because Kaliti has always been a place where clear answers are hard to come by. Let's go back to a name we mentioned before. The Zone 9 bloggers. Remember, Zone 9 doesn't exist inside Kaliti Prison. There are 8 zones. Zone 9 is the zone beyond the last one. The place that isn't there. A group of young Ethiopian writers chose that name deliberately. They felt that's where the government wanted to put them, beyond reach, beyond sight, beyond help. In 2014, 6 of those bloggers were arrested. Their crime? Writing online, running a blog where they discussed politics, human rights, and the state of their country. They were charged under Ethiopia's anti-terrorism proclamation, a law that human rights organizations said was being used to silence journalists, bloggers, and peaceful activists. People with laptops and words, not weapons. The bloggers were taken to Kaliti. Some were held for over a year before their trial even began. One of them, a writer named Befeqadu Hailu, later described the experience not just as physically difficult, but psychologically crushing. The uncertainty, the feeling that the outside world had forgotten you existed. That slow erasure of a person was something many Kaliti prisoners describe. You go in, and the world moves on without you. But the world did not always move on. Sometimes, the world fought back. And the story of Berdikan Mideksa is one of the most powerful examples of that fight. Berdikan was not a criminal. She was a judge, turned politician, who became one of Ethiopia's most prominent opposition leaders. In 2008, she was arrested and sentenced to life in prison. Life, for a woman whose only weapon was her voice and her politics. She was taken to Kaliti. Inside, she was held in a cell measuring 2 by 3 meters. To give you a picture, that's roughly the size of a small bathroom, which she shared with 2 other people. International pressure mounted. Human rights organizations and governments around the world called for her release. She was eventually freed in 2010. But Berdikan's case revealed something that Kaliti's existence had always suggested, that this prison was not just a place for people who had done wrong. It was a tool for silence. If this story is making you feel something right now, that's important. Subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. and share this video, because the first step to change is making sure people know the truth. Over the years, the list of people who passed through Kaliti's gates reads like a directory of Ethiopia's most prominent voices: journalists, academics, singers, politicians, human rights defenders. Riata Limu, a journalist and teacher who was arrested in 2011 and charged with terrorism for writing newspaper columns critical of the government. She was held in Kaliti for years. In 2013, she was awarded the UNESCO or Guillermo Cano World Press Freedom Prize, one of the most respected awards in journalism, while she was still behind bars. Think about that. The world was giving her an award, and she was in a cell. Iskander Nega, another Ethiopian journalist and blogger who had been arrested multiple times over the years. His final arrest before a long sentence came in 2012. He was sentenced to 18 years in Kaliti on terrorism charges. His real offense, according to human rights organizations, writing and speaking about democracy and freedom of the press. Teddy Afro, one of Ethiopia's most beloved musicians, even he was not untouched by Kaliti's reach. He served time there, his case becoming a symbol of how wide the net could be cast. These were not nameless, invisible people. They were the voices of a nation, and they were being swallowed by a prison built from sheet metal and silence. Now, let's talk about what has changed and what has not. In 2018, something significant happened in Ethiopia. A new prime minister came to power, a man named Abiy Ahmed, and almost immediately, he began doing things that stunned the country and the world. He released political prisoners, thousands of them, people who had been locked up for years, journalists, opposition politicians, activists were walking out of prisons across Ethiopia, including Kaliti. Iskander Nega walked free. Merera Gudina, an Oromo political leader who had spent time in Kaliti, walked free. Many of the Zone 9 bloggers, who had been rearrested at various points, found themselves free. For a moment, it felt like a new chapter was beginning. And in many ways, it was. Abiy Ahmed would go on to win the Nobel Peace Prize in 2019. But here is where the story refuses to wrap up neatly. Because the truth about places like Kaliti is that they don't disappear just because the political wind changes. The prison is still there, 11 kilometers south of Addis Ababa. The same gate, the same walls, the same zones. And in the years that followed the initial wave of releases, reports of new arrests began to emerge again. New names, new political opponents, new journalists finding themselves on the wrong side of power. History, in this part of the world, has a way of repeating itself. So what does Kaliti Prison tell us? Not just about Ethiopia, but about something much wider. It tells us about what happens when a government decides that the most dangerous thing a person can do is speak. It tells us about what happens when a prison is built not on a plan, but on a panic thrown together from whatever was available, expanded by the hands of the very people trapped inside it. It tells us about what happens when the world looks away. Because for decades, most of the world did look away from Kaliti. The reports existed, the testimonies existed, the evidence existed, written carefully in documents by organizations like Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, and the Human Rights League of the Horn of Africa. But a report that no one reads makes no sound. A story that no one tells changes nothing. Martin Schibbye, the Swedish journalist who spent 438 days inside Kaliti, drew that map when he came out. He sat down and carefully reconstructed, from memory, every zone, every building, every corner of the compound he had lived in for over a year. He didn't do it for himself. He did it so that the world could see what he had seen. So that a place that was designed to keep secrets could no longer keep them quite as easily. That map exists today. Published. Available. A quiet, detailed act of defiance against a system that counted on invisibility to survive. That is what documentation does. That is what truth does. It draws the map of the places that don't want to be found. Kaliti Prison is still standing today. Its gates still open and close and open again. There are people inside those walls right now whose names we may never know, whose stories may never reach us. whose families wait and wonder and hope. And the only thing that has ever made a difference for people in places like Kaliti is the world refusing to look away. You now know this place exists. What you do with that knowledge is up to you.